Hi everyone, it's Tuesday and we're about to open in about 2 weeks. We're going to be opening up the doors and we'll see who's going to be walking through. But if you're a martial arts student here, whether it's Tai Chi, Kung Fu, or other, we hope to see you when you come back. The doors will be open June 29th. I think that's the day. It's a Tuesday. And we're going to do a soft opening. We're going to send out a schedule really soon. And we're going to have a lot of things in place that will make it safe for you to come back. And before that happens, we're probably going to do a couple of Tai Chi classes on a Sunday outdoors so that we can kind of reconnect and get comfortable knowing that it's going to be a safe environment. So anyways, with that said, this is Kung Fu Intermediate and Advanced pillar forms, what do you call it? Gung, Kuen, and Fook. I lost the train of thought. So, Lucian, anybody have a question? Okay. So the last few classes I've been focused on different things, but I went into this kind of premise of breathing and movement and how essential that is. Now, a lot of you probably didn't follow in the morning with the intermediate, but in a lot of our training, especially in Gung, Kuen, when we breathe in and out, our breath has to be tied to movement in a sense that breath and movement has to be coordinated. So in coordination of breath and movement, you have one inhalation, one exhalation. Inhalation is more than just taking air in and out. You know, we breathe because we bring air into the lungs and it supplies oxygen to the blood and then it's sent circulating through our body. But we only look at the physical external movement, right? But the internal movement is part of that breath. Your diaphragm, your lungs, your expansion of the chest cavity, your ribs, all of this, your back, all of this involved in breathing. And what I brought up in the last class was, you know when you have an injury, how important those areas that move are part of your breath. So if you get hit in the ribs or you pulled your back or you have your shoulder blade that was tweaked, you know when you breathe that it hurts. And there's a reason for it hurting because something is injured. And that musculature, whether it's the tissue or it's the nerve that got pinched or whatever, affects how you breathe. And when it affects your breathing, it affects your movement. And that's all part of your proprioceptive sensory system that will restrict your movement. So if you have an injury, your movements are not going to be complete because some of the signaling is severed by your proprioceptive system that says, don't go there because you're injured. So your body wants you to not move those areas so it can heal, right? So when we're breathing and you inhale, exhale, the breath inward and the breath outward is coordinated, and that coordination is tied to your diaphragm and the inhalation of your breath and the exhalation. So it's going up and down. So when we talk about syncing your breath to your lower abdomen, is what they call the dantian, which is 3.5 inches. That's your center of gravity. When you inhale and you exhale, that's what's happening. The inhale. So what causes that to happen is the breath, by filling with air, oxygen, right? Air intake comes down, and there's pressure that's built inside. That's what the iron wire does. That's what all of the breath and movement that we call in the Neigong is, because the breath and movement and the pressure that's inside changes. And what does that do? It strengthens the inside of your body, or it moves the inside of your body. So that happens, and you're building this coordination. So that relationship of breath and movement starts to become part of the coordinated movement. In Qigong, they do this anyways, but it doesn't have what we call the intent of movement. When you go like this and your intention is to put power there, that has to be tied to your body and coordinated with the breath and movement. If the body's not relaxed and you want to strike, how do you do that unless your body allows that accommodation? And how does the breath and movement work? When you exhale, you breath in. Exhale is a split second, and then there's reserve, and then you utilize that part of it for another movement, unless you're doing this. Then the reserve is less, but there's always going to be reserve. You never deplete all of the oxygen or the air in your system, because you'd have these lapses, and that probably happens if you pass out or your lung collapse or something like that. But the thing is, with just general type things, we're actually moving and breathing and moving and breathing completely all the time. So that's something that we have to be aware of. And when we're in, say, Gung when we do this, inhale. So we breathe, I breathe, I can speak for myself and what we do, because many other teachers might do it another way. It's very somewhat system specific, but at the same time, there's different schools of thought. I inhale and exhale mainly through the nose. I don't exhale through the mouth, only because I'm trained like that because of the Tai Chi and some of the internal systems, yet we breathe totally through the nose. So that's how I have been conditioned and trained. The nose is actually for breathing, although a lot of disciplines use the nose, inhale and exhale through the mouth. It's really volume of air. If your system is not efficient to bring enough volume of air through the nose, through the nostrils, then you must have to breathe through the mouth in order to satisfy the needs of the body. That's a physiological thing. If you can satisfy your system with enough oxygen efficiently through the nose, and I think that's the reason why I can breathe through my nose, because my system is efficient in the utilization of the oxygen and the breath, because it's not conflicted. If you have conflicted movement, you're going to have tension, you're going to have hyperventilation, you're going to have an imbalance. That imbalance really is reflected upon how much oxygen your system is demanding and how much you're giving it. If there's a discrepancy there, then you can have like this oxygen deficit where you're not enough, so then you start to breathe through your mouth, and you probably have to stop. And you've seen people, that put so much energy into something and they're completely exhausted. That's like at the super high level, like someone running a sprint in 3 minutes or something like that, and he stops, and then he has to catch his breath, and he has to kind of pause so that nothing else is being utilized except for the breath to reoxygenize the system. Otherwise, you collapse. You'd pass out because the oxygen has to go somewhere first. So that's really what happens even when we do Kung Fu. So because we're regulating movement, and as we become more efficient, as we become more skillful, we can control those movements a lot better. So that's how that works. So when we're breathing, when we go up, is that the active movement or the passive movement? If I go like this, then I use power here. But when I go like this, I'm inhaling. You know why I'm inhaling? Because the next movement is exhaling, and then you thrust. So inhalation and exhalation is not necessarily always with the specific movement. It's really with the type of action you're creating. So that idea comes in through your experience. And what's that? Okay. Yeah, Danji Kyosu, yeah. It's all of the above. It depends on how you want to focus on what you look at. Danji Kyosu is very unique to the Hung Gar system, but you see these kind of positions or these kind of positions or these kind of positions in lots of different disciplines. Some of it is stylistic, some of it is, sort of circulation of energy through the body. This specific thing represents the Hung fist, but you're training your fingers for grasping, pulling, and gripping. The fingertip in this position, depending on your interpretation, could be poking, and it also has usefulness in, what do you do when you text? You hit a button. So there's an intent in the movement, right? So why do you use that index? Because you have control of that. Why don't you use your pinky? Because you have dexterity in this finger. That's your first finger. So you use that finger to control. If I cross bridges with someone, I change my hand position. The thumb and this finger work together to grab. If you didn't have a thumb, you couldn't hold on to anything. So holding on has to do with these two fingers, and when we hold, those two fingers we have to control. The other three fingers are used when we pull and grasp and twist. So you need all of your fingers to create some of these actions. So what we're developing this is fingertip control. And fingertip control comes from how we hold and configure that hand. But once your hand here, you're utilizing, this action. So a lot of kids, when they first do Hung Gar, they have a little trouble getting their hand into the position. Why? Because manipulating your fingers is a dexterity that allows you to control your hand. And hand strength is something that's built. Hung Gar, really, we use hand strength as one of the ways of developing skillfulness and dexterity in the hand. When you hold a staff, whether it's a fingertips, some people do it like this, some people do it like this. So the finger creates a structure that has different position that adds strength, or mainly to add strength, because you wouldn't do that to add a weakness to your hand. So it's really to enhance your position. Chunkyo like this, because once you block a bridge, then your hand is going to, once you release your wrist, then it becomes the grasping part of it. This creates tension here, so that you have strength in here. So this is the surface that you block with or strike with, because when you have tension here, that adds some strength to the block, because you can't do it totally relaxed, because the impact will penetrate the muscle and damage the muscle and the bone. So a lot of times when we train in a contracted state, we develop a musculature that is not just rigid, it's pliable and has elasticity. So when you get hit and you have strength, it doesn't penetrate because it has a resilience. When you have resilience in your structure, like you're doing arm pounding and leg pounding, it doesn't allow the muscle to become totally rigid. It reacts and responds. So that's really one of the things that happen. When your body has a tremendous ability to adapt. So what's some of this adaptability? Why, like arm pounding, I just brought that up as an instance, or leg pounding or whatever. When you beat your body, and I'm not suggesting that you do this, I'm just saying that when your body gets hit, over time your body will develop a resistance. In fact, your bones will become stronger when you do arm pounding, leg pounding, because what happens is the bone, when it gets banged, it wants to develop more density. So the same thing happens to your leg bones through gravity and weight as weight-bearing exercise. So everything that happens is it responds. So do we need to do that today to condition our body like that? No. Even if you walk barefoot and you have, you're walking on rough surfaces or hot places, your feet will develop calluses. It's a response to defend the nerves and so forth on the soles of your feet. So the same thing as the people that hit and they chop things and you get calluses, you develop more strength in the hand because of the impact. And your hands and so forth, like iron training, iron palm training, all of that is because your body will build a stronger and better matrix for striking, and that's really what would happen. So you can see the conditioning training has specific ideas that are built that's actually true. It really does, that those things do happen. So when we talk about breath and the movement, balancing of that, efficiency of movement, why we need oxygen and why we have to be proficient and execute a certain way, it all happens because it's a reaction for the body's adaptation. So while we're building these movements and we're punching, and we're moving our body, we're building response time. We're building accuracy of movement, timing, position. Only happens through repetition. And when we do it like that, it becomes in the mind, in the body, becomes a reflex. And then you can do it fast. And the response time becomes quicker and quicker depending on, how long you do it and how you build that perception. So anyways, so that's going back to what we talked about here. When you strike and you thrust and you sink, those are actions. Sink here, thrust. Now, this may not be the actual poking, even though you're poking. But to give you an idea so that you know the difference, when my hand is up like this, that's a setup for this. Okay? So anytime, whether it's full hawk, and I go like this is the down movement, this is the strike. That's what you're using as a wrist block. The wrist block is not, it's called a wrist block. That's a name because the wrist is involved, just like I say, waist turn. It's not just that. When I go like this, that's a wrist block. But actually, the block itself is the forearm. When the hand comes down like this, your arm has to be parallel to the floor. Because if something comes in, I go like this, that's the block here. This is the thrust. Now, if I block like this, it's gone. Now, I can thrust like this or use this as my setup. So every movement can be both offensive or defensive. Depends on how you interpret that movement. So when you do your form, you'll end up doing your movement depending on the intensity of that motion and how you express that motion will modify and adapt your breath. So that's something that's kind of interesting to let you know that don't think that every movement like that is going to be an exhalation, but then at the same time, it could be in a position where you're like this, which is soft, and then this becomes, so here, and then you would thrust and exhale there. But generally, when you do the offensive movement, the setup is going to be where you inhale. The execution or the focus of that movement will be the exhalation. Now, do you have to exhale with every movement? Not necessarily, because you do have some storage capacity here that you can draw off but you have to breathe, within a period of time. Say here, Gung Chi Kun. You would inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Now look at when you inhale, your breath is coming down and you exhale. So you're driving the movement and you're tying it to the breath. So you have an elongated breath, and that can be an elongated exhale. So you could balance it because it's done slowly, okay? But when you go like this, inhale, exhale, that's quicker. The focus point is here, but don't exhale here, that long breath. You exhale at the end of the movement because the burst of strength is at the very end. You don't have to exhale from here. And if you notice, if you start to exhale slowly, your movements are going to be slow. When you exhale fast, the movement will be fast. It's just that correlation and coordination. So that's something that maybe you're probably already doing a lot of that naturally. But when I bring it up like that, then it gives you something to reference and say, okay, I might have been doing it correct. Because you always need, when you second guess a concept, then you don't know if you're doing it absolutely right. So this is where, feedback and kind of working with a teacher kind of reinforces what your understanding is. Because most of the time, when we're learning and we don't really truly understand it, we have to think about it, interpret it, and then come up with a solution of what you think it is. It could be right, it could be kind of right, and it could be completely wrong. But the thing is, if someone else comes up with, the same concept or principle that has a different take on it, or maybe a different understanding, then you can take that information and say, okay, that's what he said, this is what I think he means, and then you kind of adapt it to your learning. And then if it's right, then that's the one you would probably use because it supports what you're doing. If it doesn't support what you're doing, you might have to get another opinion. Say, well, so then you have to decide. That's what learning is. When you learn, you can't take everything that you hear that's verbatim or that's the way it should be. Because teachers always have some form of interpretation. Now, I I've already done a lot of that sorting out because I've done it along the time, and I've done it for enough time from different teachers and understanding that I can take all those ideas and then I could pull it into this funnel, and then what comes out of that could be a varying amounts of ideas and interpretation. I select the one that I think is the most correct, and then that's what I share. I don't take everybody's misinterpretation of things and then try to share that, because that would just confuse you. Okay, next. So we're in the dragon position, right? Now here, sink. Now if I sink with power, then I could go, that's breathing through the nose. Now, I don't breathe through the mouth, so that could be a little bit different from how you're looking at it. So here, then I'm back to here. Okay, when I turn, I might inhale here, exhale here, right? So that would be that position. Then I go back in here. So sometimes you could have a double exhalation depending on a double power stroke. And sometimes you could have a double inhalation. Just like when you're in a stance, you can have sinking and then sinking again. That's called double sink. If you double sink, it's really, every time you settle is really creating the next motion. Because while you're in position, it's not necessarily the final position. It's finished, and then it starts to change because you're going into the next mode of transition. So that all happens spontaneously based on your body's response. That's a level of skill that you develop over time. You can't do this when you're learning the sequence, because your whole focus when you're learning on sequence is that. It's focused on sequence. You have to learn the sequence, embody the sequential part of the form, and then you have to relearn the form. When you relearn the form, you pick up not 100% of the information that's at that stage. You take in relative to your skill level of understanding. So then when you evolve through that sequence and evolve through that level of transition, then you have to go back and you have to redo that movement again. So the form evolves and evolves and evolves. So it could be relearning that form, not sequentially, but in execution and timing and concept and theory over a period of time. Could be maybe 10 times, maybe 20 times. It really varies with individuals, but don't look at totally as relearning those specific things within the dispersing realm. I'm just saying that there is stages of relearning and relearning and relearning, and depending, as you get more advanced, those get shorter and shorter, because all of the information that you've taken over the period of time starts to blend. When it starts to blend, then the information that you have that's up here and in here starts to become one. So all these ideas start to merge, and then when they merge into one, that's what I call, or at least our system calls, the unification of oneness. When your ideas, concept, and already comes to one peak, that's the mastery of that idea. And that does take a long, long time. But the thing is, it's not, there's no rush to get to that point, because you can't get there without going through this. You have to go there through stages of development. And it's not a magic, and then it's not mystical. There's no secret and some superhuman thing that's going on here. It's really process of the human physiology and the human learning process. There's very, shortcutting is really if you have done more of it to support each other. So if you're an athlete, if you've done a lot of things that are similar, then you can pick up on it. But the focus is really on what the body has to do. Okay. So let's go from here. Let's hear. Forward. Exhale here. This can be pretty passive. Strike. Exhale. Right? This one would be exhale. Actually, here you can inhale, because this is set down. Now exhale again. So there would be, every time you move, you have a split second to determine whether you're going to exhale or not. So this is a power move. Inhale on that step. Exhale. cross, inhale, step, exhale. So there's an exhale there. But because I'm breathing through my nose and I've been trained to do that, it's very quick. And you can do bursts of breath simultaneously. And because your breath is deep and controlled internally, you can draw, release, and have that breath accommodate the movement easily. For me, because my breathing happens through, just a spontaneous motion, I have numerous breaths within the same movement. That's how I'm able to achieve doing the movement and still talking to you, or even doing a lot of things, because my system just has adapted. So, but you can do this by understanding, the relation between breath and movement. But it does take some time. The key thing is sinking is exhale, rising can be inhale, power movements are exhale. Just keep that basically as the basic principle, and then the sort of the intermediate breath, you'll have to build that based on your experience with the form. Okay, let's take this movement in the form, double back fist. So come like this, lead with the elbow, and then follow here. Now when you do this back fist and you sink, sinking is down. So the downward movement is this. You should be in this stance. You should be relaxing this hip. One of the things a lot of teachers talk about when a student is not in their stance, it's because the hip is not relaxed. When the hip is not relaxed, it's because it's too physical. When you're in a stance, it's not a bent leg. It's a sinking into the stance. You're sunken into stance because sinking is deep. Bending is high, it's shallow. So when you're not in your stance, we say you're not sinking into your stance. You haven't sat into your stance. That's kind of the literal interpretation. When you come to here, if you don't sit into your stance, and that means let go of the tension in the legs, then you're not in your stance. Okay, so that's really important in the traditional Kung Fu. You have to be rooted. So rooting is when you're in your stance, then you have foundation. When you move, it's there, you're solid. If you're going into your stance and you're wobbling or your knees are doing this, you're unstable. So the idea is, if you're unstable, how can you strike out and have any power? Because you don't have a base. You have to have a base. And that base is your stability. And if it's not rooting, which is really like, that's a metaphor to show that like a tree rooted, the deeper the root, the more solid. Well, that's because it has a big, the bigger the tree, the bigger the root ball. The root ball goes out as far as the outer perimeter of the leaves, that's the branches, because it has to support each other. There's a balance underground that you don't see. That's what the Kung Fu rooting is. When you're in your stance, you're solid. When you're in your stance, you have to be solid. So you're comfortable in your stance. If you go into your stance and you're using muscular strength and you're holding, after 5 seconds, you can barely stand on your leg. How are you going to do a strike? So you have to be in your stance. You have to be able to stabilize yourself. When you cross, when I open, when I step, and I poke, the stance has to be, so I thrust, this turns. That's a twisting. When I sit like this, I relax and open. When I go forward, I drop my shoulders and I push. Then I form my hand position, I drop my elbows, then I'm here. I take my step forward, I strike with this, but here, I make it one. And then I bring this down, and I uppercut. So you see those movements are all tied to the relation between the legs, the stance work, the footwork. So we talk about the 5 coordinations. The last one is legs, right? Ma, the stance. So you have your stance position. You have your method, the transition. That's your footwork. And then how are those legs working to create sinking, which is this. Relax the hips. So everything we talk about, okay, relax, relax, relax. It's letting go. Let it go of the tension in your joints. Then your body will sort of form into the position and give you the right position to execute a technique. Because ultimately, that's your goal, to go from point A to point B efficiently as possible and create as much power as you can. So it is, very important to understand how learning and training is developed. Okay, so that's traditional arts. It has lots of value to the way we practice, and it's not only a health benefit. There's a martial side of that, and there's also a tremendous support for age-related degeneration. If you're doing Kung Fu, it's also part of what Tai Chi offers, age-related degeneration. But if you look at it, it's supported by all types of disciplines in the martial arts world. Everybody has a different style that they work with. But the thing is, if you're learning this style, these are some of the things we focus on. If you're learning another style, you have to discover what is offered there. But just remember that when you study something, especially martial arts, it's not how many styles you know, it's how well you do them. And that's very important, because if you have this much inventory and you have this little understanding, that doesn't go anywhere. You need this level of understanding to be up here. Down here is you don't need all of that inventory. You have to take this inventory, bring it up to this level, and then you're going to be skillful, because that's what it is. It's the quality of understanding, quality of movement that's going to make you skillful. You can learn to throw 500 punches, but you actually only need a half a dozen or a dozen to really be achieved. Because if you have 500 lousy punches, what good is it? Okay, so Lucien, what time? About time? Okay, so hopefully I answered some of the questions that people were struggling with. Intermediate and advanced, it's a stage, it's a level. You know some of the forms that we've been teaching. You can learn those of you following us. You have the morning classes that work on some of those basic forms. But going forward, when we open up the doors, some of these classes that we're doing streaming will dial back, and then I'll focus more on learning a sequence for those that want to do that. And if you're interested in learning the forms, let us know that. And I'll teach form more than I teach concept, because right now I'm really focusing on concept, because I don't know exactly what everybody wants out there. I just stream this out, and I just talk and talk and talk, and I hope that whoever's listening wants that information, but it's kind of random. So on that note, thumbs up, go to YouTube, subscribe, share it with anybody that you know. The goal is to keep traditional martial arts alive, and along with that, hopefully, if you're a martial arts practitioner, this is all going to help your skill level and your students. Okay, on that note, I'll see you next time.